Hello and welcome to another Friday of Facebook Live. Thanks so much for joining me here on the Reactive Facebook page. And I know we get these up on YouTube every week as well. If you're a subscriber to our newsletter, you get these every week. And I'm just so thankful to have people to chat with every week. My name is Julie Hirschberg. I am the owner of Reactive Physical Therapy and Wellness here in the Los Angeles area. It is an outpatient neurologic physical therapy, occupational therapy, yoga therapy, personal training, fitness studio, all in one. And we just work so hard and we're constantly learning how we can get better at helping people get back to their lives in a way that truly changes their brain too. And that's why we hop in here every Friday to talk just kind of about the latest that we're learning. And today, we're kind of diving into part two from last week. Last week, we talked about moving beyond the biopsychosocial approach to understanding a person and their movement problems and their pain, and we this paper, which I have read, I think since I saw you all last week. I've read it again two times, and then I've read a few more papers that these authors recommended. Um, the paper is called Beyond the Psychosocial, an inactive approach to pain. And it talks about these 5 E's. And we talked about them last week. And actually, in my live, I left out one of them, which is inactive. And and today I wanted to talk about one of them, which is embedded. And and there's a lot of reasons why I want to talk about this. And one of the reasons, honestly, that I'm ran late to start this Facebook Live is that I was talking to a colleague in the kitchen over here about the embedded experience, and how it was impacting the function of a person that we just evaluated together, for example. So, but I think especially now, in California, I live in Southern California. This has just been a really tremendous week. We had super high temperatures. I think we broke all the records. We're having enormous wildfires. Our cars are covered in ashes. My favorite place, so if you follow these, you know, I went on vacation a little bit ago. My favorite place to camp, the place I've gone for 35 years, it's at the epicenter of one of those fires, which has been really scary, for us, for our family. And we're still in a pandemic. And this is the environment, the world that we're living in. It can be really hard to focus. I feel that for sure. Emotions are maybe a little more raw too. And I think we're feeling it personally. And I think the people that we are working with and helping are really feeling that too. It's a big part of our context. And this is exactly why I wanted to share about the embedded, because embedded is that in the context, in how the environment is taking a part in what we do, and how we influence the environment as well. So step back just quick to last week. We 5 E's, right? So the 5 E's in enactivism are embodied, so involving more than just the brain, but those connections between the brain and the body. Embedded, which we'll talk about today, so only functioning within having in an external environment. Enacted, so not only that we have things happening in our body, but also we are doing things in the world, and extended, so extended into our environment, and then emotive. So today when we're just going to focus on embedded. What does that even mean? How might we understand a person's embeddedness, and how does that help us understand um, a person and their diagnosis, especially with central pain, functional neurologic disorders, and dystonia? So I might have I might have put a lot in today, but I think we hit on a lot of the background last week. So let's talk about embedded first. So what does that mean? So if we're embedded, it means we are situated. We're in an environment, and this means that we're not like especially like our mind, our emotions, our experiences, they're not like floating separately from other people or from the world that we live in. And I mentioned this, and I've been carrying around this book for a little while now. I think I mentioned this last time. It's called Worlds of Experience, interweaving philosophical and clinical dimensions in psychoanalysis. But I point this out here because of the authors, Stolaro, Atwood, Orange. Um, the work is in intersubjectivity, and in particular, this is looking at it in terms of psychoanalysis. But we can also apply the idea of intersubjectivity into understanding a person, and it's described then is that we must take our interpretation based on the background and what the current context that the person is in. So we can think of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, a story. That experience is really inseparable from the environment or the context. So, um, this is very different than some of the thoughts that kind of you have this like separate mind, right? So, some of those early philosophical thoughts. So that's not the case. And you can't really separate it. So I want to give you an example from that great article, by the way, in the 5Es article. So the example in one of the research studies was a person standing at the top of a hill. And the person was either given that they're standing on a skateboard or they're standing on a box. And depending on what they were standing on, the hill is actually perceived as much steeper if they're on a less stable surface. So if they're on a surfboard, I think a surfboard, sorry, on a skateboard, I think that makes sense that they the threat level is higher. So the environment changed. Nothing changed in their body, nothing changed in their vision, but their perception changed. So the threat went higher because I'm standing at the top of a hill now on a skateboard instead of a sturdy box, and my perception changes. So that's an example of the embeddedness and how much that actually will change our perception. And the perception, as we know, will change our action. It'll change our movement. It may change our sensory experience. It may change what we take in vision wise and how we interpret that. So, so important. And how do we truly understand with the person in front of us what is the context for them? So, I want to share something with you that we had developed for a course last year. We had a weekend course. We're actually having the second annual version of this weekend course coming up in October, and it's called Cultivating Central Nervous System Connectivity. And we had been using something in clinically of a pie chart, and we created one that we would use with a person to help us understand um, where we where the person is coming from, how they understand themselves. So understanding their embeddedness. We didn't use that word in here, but we have the person complete this little pie chart. So it says understanding your symptoms, meaning what is your understanding of your symptoms? So it even says in here, let's break it down. Let's figure out what factors are contributing, and that'll help us understand how to address them. Could it be your nervous system? Could it be your tissues? So here we start thinking of embodiment, right? So the body, the brain. Could it be your life? So life changes, stressful events, work. Could it be the environment around you? So could it be that we're living in smoke-filled Southern California right now? Is that an environmental influence? And so we have the person, and it even says here, create a pie chart where you feel are the things that are influencing your symptoms. Now, we don't give this to everybody, and we don't just hand it to a person without discussing it either. But when we do, so we bring this to the conversation and say, "Gosh, you've explained a lot of things to me today, and I, I'm hearing this. By the way, kind of repeating back is very helpful in understanding a person's embeddedness, understanding their context." But I would say then I would really like for you to create this pie chart. I really want to understand kind of what maybe percentage you're thinking are from each of these pieces of the pie. Now we understand a lot of those pieces of the pie are interconnected, right? That's part of the five E's as well. But this really helps me understand where the person is coming from, and leads to conversation, leads to questions, and really listening to their story. This is where I think this tool can help, but when we're with the person in person too, there's this process that goes back and forth between us where we're really trying to make sense um, of each other. So it's between the self and the person. And, the person meets us and we meet them. And so I think that back and forth, that bi-directional piece is really important to understand the embeddedness. Um, some of the things that I think about too is really seeing that person for who they are and not a diagnosis or not a kind of category of people. I think to myself, how am I actually hearing and asking about their story? I like to ask questions. And maybe this seems really obvious, but about their life, career, relationships that are really important to them. And where are they in those relationships right now? What do they believe about their pain or their diagnosis or their symptoms? Um, asking a simple question like, talk me through a typical day. Then we can listen and listen for patterns in their lifestyle, listen to those relationships, listen to the environment, what's happening in the morning, where are they, what happens at work, how is that set up? Um, one of the things that I like to ask too, in particular to pain, to understand their understanding of it too, is like when you feel that pain, or when you experience those movements, what do you think is happening? Like, you of course as a therapist are starting to formulate some hypotheses, but really, oftentimes that person's going to give you the exact answer when they say, well, this is what I think is happening. And oh my gosh, if you could start there, you're like 75% of the way um, through. So those are some ways that are helpful to go about really understanding the embeddedness of a person. I don't even know if that's a word, but I just made it up. But really, truly understanding their context and their understanding of what is happening. Um, and And now let's talk a little bit. I've given you a couple of examples in pain, and I think that in the 5Es article that was the emphasis. Um, and I think there's just so many really great examples in the pain literature, and they do a really nice summary of this. By the way, I really highly recommend reading the article. In the article, they talk about the body of literature that actually shows that the context and situations, especially how they may embed a sense of threat or of safety, would directly lead to either a worsening with threat or a dampening when there's safety. And this makes me think of the really great work by the NOI group, Lorimer Mosley and Butler, with the protectometer, right? So looking at danger and safety in terms of understanding pain. Some of the other things to think about is what has the person kind of understood or even been told by a family member, by a physician, like, oh, if it hurts, don't do it. Let pain be your guide. Um, hurt equals damage. So those those things can really lead to a person kind of getting stuck in a rut. So those are other parts of the context are those beliefs and maybe what people around may say. And so then it follows that our intervention should consider that embedded person and understand and address all sorts of sources of threat. So there might be some biological pieces, they might be muscle or joint injuries there. But what about all those other things? What about the messages? What about the beliefs? Right? So we would want to address all of those pieces. Um, and not just through talking, right? So it might be in the way we build up experiences for a person to move without pain, for example. Um, and lots of examples in pain. And when I think about functional disorders, I think about this a lot because we know that in a functional neurologic disorder, I would say embeddedness is almost everything. We look for an environmental or contextual trigger of a symptom. So that might be something as simple as sleep deprivation. It might have been um, a broken leg, like a severe musculoskeletal injury. There might be a trigger that led to the functional symptoms. And we know in functional movement disorders that the belief about and the agreement with the actual diagnosis leads or is directly correlated to the person's recovery. So, really truly understanding their beliefs about that diagnosis of functional disorder is important. And there's a really lovely belief questionnaire. I believe it's out of MGH. And they published a study with this, a really lovely study that looked at what the person's understanding and belief was about their functional movement disorder, and that's where we start. Then, where are they, and how can we help understand how they got to that understanding and belief, and what are some sources of information, and are there things that can be changed as we kind of journey with them. And then finally, in dystonia. So, this is another one that, again, there's a lot of overlap in these three disorders of pain, functional disorders, and dystonia. And I think one of the biggest things that I think about is also in terms of threat or danger. So, oftentimes, if we think of a focal dystonia, like a hand dystonia, in a musician, for example, there is, of course, going to be some implications like loss of job, loss of what you love doing every day and you've done your whole life, maybe even your identity without being able to play or perform your favorite pieces. And so understanding how those beliefs, those threats, those dangers to a life really come into play are so important, and the recognition of that and incorporating that understanding into your treatment and progression of treatment in dystonia is so important. um, I want to give you one example. It's not a dystonia example, but it's something um, that has it really strikes me. One of my good friends, who's really a great physical therapy researcher, professor, loves to box. And I'll never forget that when she had some shoulder pain, one of the first things that a therapist told her was like, you need to stop boxing. Well, that was a huge part of her identity in life. Um, and that was pretty much the end of her therapy for that person, um, because that her goal was to actually find ways to be able to do it and to do it safely, and maybe like take a little break or change it up, but that um, that that person, and she even really well identified this, that person kind of missed the mark on understanding her context, right? So so important to really ask those questions, of the person in front of you. Um, so there we go. Today we went deeper beyond the biopsychosocial to truly understand a person's experience. And we talked about it with central pain, dystonia, functional neurologic disorders, but this is universal. Um, we talked about what embedded means. We talked about how we understand that, how it helps us in these different disorders. And I know we have a question here too. Could we have the resources for the danger pain research? Absolutely. And actually, if you, I'll post the link to the 5E's article because they do a really lovely review of that research, with multiple references. Um, to as part of the review, and part of why this is so important and why this theory helps inform us as physical therapists working with people with pain in particular. So I'll post the link to that again, and the references are obviously listed in the study. Um, so we're going to keep diving into some of these topics because we have been, oh boy, I'm so excited because Brittany and I just spent 2 hours this morning. I'm really excited. I'm not going to show you it because it's my crude drawing. Well, I guess I'll show you it, but we're working on a really great education tool to use with this idea of the bird in flight. So, so stay tuned for that. But this is kind of the centerpiece of our course that's coming up in October. So really looking big picture at the whole person to drive central nervous system connectivity. So that's the name of our course, Cultivating Central Nervous System Connectivity, a guide to both assessment and treatment in central pain, functional neurologic disorders, and dystonia. And that course is literally a month away. I'm so excited. And I think it's really the culmination of pretty much all of the work that I do, all the learning that I do is coming into this course, and with Brittany as well, and neurologists. So we have two neurologists joining to teach that course so that we can truly understand it from the whole picture of management. So we are limiting the number of people that can sign up for the course live. It is going to be recorded. So we have 9 more spots in the live course. So I encourage you, if you're interested in it, to grab a seat for it. It's coming up in a month again. It's October. It's online, and I hope you'll join us for that. And until then, I will see you next week when we dive into even more of this. And thanks so much for joining me today.